All right, let's go ahead and get started. So today on the agenda, I wanted to go over the pending PRs that we have remaining for volume resizing and then talk about the 1.2 release plan. So let's jump right into it. There are a couple of PRs that are currently out. Let's take a quick look at them and see what's remaining. I see Hamant is on the line. I don't know if Ben is. It doesn't look like he is, but we can take a quick look here. So this PR is adding a new staging target path to both node get volume stats request as well as the volume expansion node expand volume call. And the purpose of this change, as I understand it, is without knowing whether it's a staging path or a.
Hey, this is Ben. I'm here.
Hey, Ben.
Sorry I'm late.
No problem. So we were just going over this PR. So the change here is to add a new staging path, and the purpose is that prior to this, it was confusing. It was unclear which one was which. So I think there was some feedback that was left here. I took a look at it yesterday. I think my primary feedback is around the backwards compatibility question. So if the staging target path is set, I think it's pretty easy to figure out what the old target path should be. If the staging target path is not set, that's the case I wanted to talk through.
Yeah, this is the backwards compatibility case. So an old CO that has not implemented this change yet.
So is it true that for new COs, they would always set the staging target path no matter what in all scenarios for both of these RPCs?
There's no reason not to. The wording of according to my PR, the new wording of the spec will say should set it, because we can't say must set it.
Right.
But there's no reason not to, because you always know it if stage unstage is a capability and you have a staging path.
Got it. And so what that means is that if you are a volume plugin that depends on this, if it is unset, it is safe for you to basically fail that request and say, sorry, I really need this field, which means that you need to update your CO to make sure it passes that field.
Well, I mean, if there was some CO implementer that took the stance that I'm not going to do this because the spec doesn't say I have to do it, then you would just have an incompatibility.
Yep, and that's fair.
That seems unlikely.
You're right. Okay. I just wanted to understand that. So I think the confusion I had was, is there a legitimate case where a well-behaving new CO would want to sometimes pass in staging target path and sometimes not pass it in? If that was the case, then it would become difficult to kind of detect this case for the SP.
No, there is no good reason to leave it blank.
Sorry, did somebody say something?
I think Ben, you broke in the middle.
Oh, I thought it sounded like an interference from someone else. There is no good reason to leave it blank.
Okay. All right, so I think we're good here then.
So if there's a CO, like older version of older CO, and the plugin has been updated and it is not setting it, then the existing call should not fail, right?
So my kind of point is that if you have a volume plugin that absolutely requires this, you should just fail it. And then surface that message up to the CO, and that's an indication for the user that they need to update, the version of the CO they're using.
And you would document to your users that your plugin is not compatible with Kubernetes older than version X.
Exactly. And
but
then in the case
backward compatible, are we sure that's the path we want to take?
It's up to the SP to decide what backwards compatibility that they want to support, right? We
Yeah,
don't really have an option here. Either we say we're going to break the spec, or we say the spec, it remains kind of, you should do this, and if the spec is going to be you should do this, then it's up to the SP to make that decision of like, hey, I am going to support newer versions for this specific call.
and an SP can always say, I'm choosing not to support older versions of Kubernetes just because I don't want to bother testing it and supporting my customers, right? That's
Yep.
a SP's choice.
Right.
To say, I don't want to support that.
Yep.
Even if it could technically work, you just say, you know what, that's too old, I'm not bothering.
Yeah, and the nice thing I think with Kubernetes is for the two calls here, they're called not by Kubernetes components, but by sidecar containers. And so,
No, sir. Both are
no?
called by kubelet actually.
Okay. So you do have a direct dependency on a Kubernetes version for these two.
Yeah.
Yeah. Then it goes back to your SP needs to make a call, which is, hey, I'm only going to support volume resizing for Kubernetes version 117 and up. And given that volume resizing is beta, I think that's okay.
I just have Ben, I have a question. Like, so w- why does like as you said in your plugin also, like you were if the staging is not set just from the target path that you have, you will be for the most part you were able to figure out okay what the path is and what it is pointing to. Isn't it like is it like
No. So the problem is that some plugins need a little bit more information than you would get from just like, here's the mounted file system.
mm,
So if and because the publish path is documented to be the mount point, if you need more information than you can get from just like, here's the publish path, and the CO chooses to give you the publish path, then you have no choice but to store that information in another place. And your choices are either the staging path, which you can't find given the existing documentation, you don't know where the staging path is, or you have to create your own state storage directory in addition to the staging path and publish path and put stuff there. That is what I have chosen to do, and that is what NetApp has chosen to do to work around the existing limitation. Is we just create a whole new directory, we replicate all the state in that other place, and we rely on the volume ID, and we ignore the path that gets passed in completely because it's useless. You know, we need information about the volume that you can't get from the publish path. So we store it in another place. So if the spec change goes in, it would alleviate the need to have a whole other place to store data, because you could always find the staging path if it existed, and it would simplify other SP implementations.
for in particularly for node get info stats, like the call that returns like like inode uses and byte uses, in
Mhm.
that case like mostly like right now actually CO will always right now Kubernetes will always give you the publish path, not staging path ever actually. So how about that? Does it matter? Like if you there also you need to figure out okay this is the published path, but I need the staging path so that I can calculate volume uses.
So I don't think you need the staging path to do get volume stats, but you can't write a plugin that depends on Kubernetes behavior. You have to write a plugin that follows the spec.
Right. Yeah.
So
Now, if I had a choice, then I would say that the node get info in particularly always says publish path. But I think
I mean, it would be nice if we could go back and change it to be always be one path, always be the other. But the problem is you can't change it. So my change is the least disruptive incremental change that gets you to where you need to be.
okay,
Hey,
yeah,
hey,
okay.
Ben, question, just need some clarification. So currently, what is get passing from the node expand volume? Is that the published path
It's the
or
CO's choice.
by
The
I
CO
mean
can choose to
Kubernetes?
pass you the publish path, or it can choose to
So,
pass you the staging path if you have stage on stage.
but what is the current Kubernetes behavior? Is it always passing?
Currently, Kubernetes publishes uh, put staging path there if you are like if the pod is just starting, and and the volume needs to be resized before the pod could start. Like we do that so that you don't have to do that resizing afterwards. So
So
in
even
that
for
case,
Kubernetes, it could be both. It could be both. Could be either staging path or the publish path.
yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, I mean, ideally, if we could go back in time, we would say just pass both paths if you have them, right? And that would solve all the problems, but we can't go back in time. So adding this change is the closest thing we can do to going back in time and fixing it. And some plugins may choose to do what NetApp has done, which is just store the state somewhere else and ignore the path altogether. But some might say, oh, I'm going to rely on the staging path being set so that I don't have to have an external place to store data, which is actually a better design. It's just you can't do it today.
No, I'm
I,
just thinking of. I completely agree that we need the staging path for the expand volume call, and I'm totally on board with that. I'm just having a little bit doubt about get info stats call. It sounds to me that in most cases the path that is like you can only
well,
return.
so my view on that is, let's be consistent, right?
Mm,
When you're supplying paths to an SP, when you're asking it to do something, why not pass both if you have both? Like, why just pass one? It doesn't save the CO anything. It's not like the CO has to do work to dig up the other path. It has it.
Yep.
Just we should just have a consistent, when the CO is interacting with the node plugin to do something to an already published volume, give it both the staging path and the published path every time, and don't worry about whether it needs it or not. Just do it as a matter of practice.
mm,
Because we can't foresee what SPs are going to want to do. Like, I think when these features were merged, we couldn't foresee that not supplying the staging path sometime would cause issues for some plugins in the expand workflow.
mm.
So it's safer to just give more information if it doesn't cost the CO anything to give that information. There are situations where it does cost the CO something, like on the delete paths. We've had long discussions about how it's a burden on the CO to supply a lot of information at delete time because it might be recovering from some horrible failure and it's trying to just clean up. So we can't supply a lot of information on delete, and I think we all accept that. But this is not one of those cases.
Yep.
in the
Okay.
existing spec, is it documented when a staging path will be passed in, when a public path will be passed in?
No,
It's,
this here.
okay.
And this is just a backwards compatibility thing. Again, if we could go back in time, we would say, here's the published path, here's the staging path.
Yep.
We already
Right.
have a field which is documented to be either of the paths, and we cannot change that. So we just are adding this
Okay,
other
so
path.
basically then the driver wouldn't know even. There's no way to know which one
No.
is.
If the CO supplies the staging path, all you have to do is compare it to the volume path, and if they're different, the volume path is the published path, and if they're the same, the volume path is the staging path.
Okay.
I mean, if for get info stats call, like I hear that the consistency is great, but get info stats will always be called after the volume is like published. It will never be called before the volume. There's no, the node expand volume leaves a scope, leaves a room. It can be called before the volume is published, but node expand. So I think we don't explicitly call out, but I just don't see it being called.
I
So.
believe the spec says you can call get volume stats before it's published.
Mm,
It doesn't matter that Kubernetes doesn't do that. I think the spec suggests that it just has to be staged.
It doesn't say that, but okay. It says that if the volume is being used, it can be any valid path where the volume was previously staged or published.
Yeah, so it could just be staged, and it's legal for the CO to call get volume stats at that time.
All right. I think it's fine. I mean, yeah. the backward compatibility is.
Yeah, I think unfortunately, like there's no way we can do this in a backwards compatible way, right? It's the spec was loose. It was saying, hey, you could do X or Y. We found out, well, that's a bad thing because it makes it useless. The field becomes useless for the consumer. Now we want to tighten it up. When you're tightening a spec, that is a breaking change, and we can't do that until we do CSI 2.0, and we don't want to do that. And so this seems like a reasonable medium where it's like, hey, there's a new optional field that is very strongly suggested that you should implement this. And for the biggest, the client of CSI, Kubernetes, we're going to go and do the right thing. And so SPs can start to safely assume that this field will exist and kind of say, hey, I depend on this behavior. And if I don't see it, I will fail and surface that up to as an error. And that should be an indication to the CO or to the user who's using that CO to fix the CO to make sure it does pass this information. And like Ben said, it doesn't cost the CO anything additional to pass the information. It already has it at the call, so it shouldn't be a major issue. I think I'm okay with this change. The only other feedback I had was around wording. If we could be a little bit more explicit. I think my suggestion was around saying something along the lines of, if staging target path is specified, then volume path must contain the published path, not the stage path.
Oh, why?
Can tighten that wording though.
What's that?
Uh,
I mean,
can,
that's actually an additional tightening that
Yeah.
I don't think is necessary, but it would be valuable.
Yeah, I was thinking it'll just make life a little bit easier to say, oh, if I see this, then I can just make the assumption instead of having to do comparisons.
But what if the CO hasn't published it at the time it's calling this?
Oh, and then it would
It has
be
to
empty.
pass something in,
So
and it
is
doesn't have a published path because it's not published.
I guess we could put that in writing as well. So it should be either the published path or empty if it's not published, but should not be staging or something like that.
But it can't be empty. It has to be an absolute path, and it's a required field.
yeah.
So, and if we put a caveat that says only if it's already published, it doesn't do the SPs any good because they still can't depend on it being a published path if it's only been staged at that time.
That's unfortunate.
So,
okay, then maybe some logic to say, how do I determine as a SP what the other field is?
well, my contention is it's useless today and will be useless in the future.
Okay, so you're arguing that the only field that you would really need is the staging path, and the other one can more or less be deprecated.
For me, yes.
No, but for other volume types, like for, I don't know, GC, EBS, all the and CS, or sorry, Ceph that I have like reviewed or I have written code for that, they all need the volume path, and they don't have this. They don't even need the staging path, I think.
Yeah, but what if it's not published and they get this call and volume path is the staging path? Then what do?
How about this? In addition to having the staging target path, we add an explicit published target path. And for the published target path, we can say, hey, if it hasn't been published, you leave it empty. And if it has been published, you should specify it. And so then you have two new fields that are effectively clean and tight. And you have an old field, which is vague. If you're an SP that doesn't care about the distinction, you can continue to look at the old field. If you are an SP that requires a distinction between the two, you can look at either of the new ones.
Okay, but given that it's a required field, how would we deprecate it in practice, the volume path?
Yeah, I don't think we have a deprecation policy for a required field. So I don't think we can effectively deprecate it. We would just leave it around as a
relic.
Yeah.
So that just feels weird. So now we're going to have three paths: a required field that's deprecated and two optional fields, which which actually do the real heavy lifting. And it's like, I can't think of anything more gross than that.
Yeah, it is definitely gross. I'll admit
It's
that.
almost, I don't know. I kind of prefer this, maybe with some verbiage that suggests that, you know, if it's published, the volume path should be the same. But again, given that SPs aren't going to be able to rely on that, I don't know. It surprises me that there's any SP that can implement the existing version without having to do weird gymnastics.
Yeah, and I suspect a lot just haven't tried yet since this functionality is fairly new. And
What do you mean, Ben? Sorry.
It surprises me that there are SPs that implement get node expand with the current CSI API and don't need any form of external storage, because the only way that you could do that in practice that I can see is if your staging path is functionally identical to your published path and it's just you mount the volume there.
No, because in at least like in most of the cases, like for example, take EBS volume, this thing actually, like, then in that case, like if we pass the volume path contains staging path. At that time, you can do a stat call on the path, and you can figure it out what the path is. Is it like, is it is it what device it refers to, and check the file system out on it and do the expansion. So that's what we have been doing. Like,
Right, but that presumes that you've just mounted the file system at the staging path, which is a perfectly valid thing to do. But at that point, the staging path and the published path are functionally identical. They're just a place where you mount the volume.
yeah. So and the other cases like something like Rook, for example, like Chef, where the staging path is not necessarily uh, is not necessarily a mount point actually. You know what I'm saying? It's not necessarily yeah, it's a directory, but the device is actually mounted inside somewhere in the staging path. So there also like I have the code determines okay what is path and where the device will be, and it just does the expansion. Because once it has the path, then it can determine what path it has been given, because it knows where it is storing the device and where it's writing a metadata in the staging path, and then it knows where the device is and it just expands. That's what at least these three drivers I've seen.
Yeah, I did implement that chain of logic at one point, and it was like hundreds of or about 100 lines of, you know, if statements, you know, if this then that, because to determine which one you have and to be able to tell if it's an error, to determine between those three cases was too hard for me to do in 100% of cases.
I think that for now, I think just having a staging path as explicit parameter, and like the volume type storage providers that just care about staging path, and they can determine walk from that and determine the device, that's fine. And
yeah,
Okay, well,
the only thing I think I was asking here is like I'm glad we have the staging target path here. I think it'll simplify the people who are using a staging target path. That'll be very explicit. But for SPs that want to use publish path, I'd like to give them a nice clean recipe for here is how you determine the publish path if one exists, rather than like, you know, writing 100 lines of code like Ben said to try and figure that out.
My only issue is that nobody can depend on the published path existing because there's no requirement that it's even been published.
Got it.
So it would surprise me if anyone had written their code in a way that would ever look at the published path, unless they don't implement stage on stage.
Okay.
At all. In which case, then they know that the volume path is the published path anyways, because
that makes sense.
the spec tells them that.
Right, because they would have implemented it in that way as well. They never set a staging path.
yeah.
Okay.
So I feel like anyone who depends on the published path is already good. And those of us who need the staging path, this changes enough to get them that.
Okay. I think that's fine. Any kind of verbiage you want to change to make it a little bit more clear, I'd be happy to entertain. If you think it's good the way it is, I think I'm okay with the PR. Feel free to look at some of the other comments, and then I'll help approve and merge it.
Okay. Yeah, the comments came in last night. I just hadn't got a chance to respond to them
pretty
yet.
late, so. All right, cool. So conclusion, PR is good. Concerns about staging path addressed. since new COs should always pass it. Concerns about publish path not an issue because SP shouldn't depend on it unless they don't implement stage volume stage, in which case they know what target is. Okay, I'm sure there's going to be bugs in this area as vendors start implementing naively, but we'll just have to keep an eye on that. Next.
And my big request is the next time we implement a feature where we do something like this, let's please explicitly say, here's the staging path and here's the publish path.
Yes,
every time.
Absolutely. Completely agreed. And one more thing, Ben, if you could add a release note in your comment here somewhere at the bottom. That'll help when we cut 1.2.
Is there a template for that or just
I forget if there's a template we've been using. Just follow the model that Kubernetes does with the kind of block comment. All right, next one is to add volume capability to volume expansion call. I think this was discussed in the last few calls. The problem here is the inability to differentiate between block versus file in the controller expand volume call. And then on the response, why was it necessary on the response?
Not in the response, just in the,
okay.
Just the
okay.
difference.
It's the node expand volume request. Okay. All right, cool. That makes sense. And then I guess node expand volume request is the same one that Ben modified. So hypothetically, you could use his change now to differentiate between that, but this is more explicit and clear, right?
Is there going to be a merge conflict? Is that what you're getting at?
Merge conflict is one thing, but I was just like the intention of this volume capability is to differentiate for the SP to differentiate between block and file. And so I guess
yeah, but that's a different concern.
Okay. Than what the actual target path was.
Well,
I guess you could, like, if you have the staging target path, you could implicitly figure out whether it was block or file.
Yeah, but
yes.
in Node, yeah, you could figure it out. You could actually figure it out now from target path as well. But it's the problem is it's like it depends on operating system. I like Linux. You can do stat call, and Windows. I hope there will be something in Windows. I don't know what it is.
Well, yeah. What is the use case for this? One more time, like when you don't have this, what is it that you can't do?
So for control plane, like for control plane, if for example like EBS driver, so when we're just trying to resize a volume that is just being used in block mode, then you don't need to do anything on the node side. So having the capability in the control plane allows the SP to determine if something needs to happen on that node or not. That's one use case.
But how does the SP error check that? Like, how would you know if the CO sent you garbage?
So there's an error code that it returns, like if the volume capability is invalid, and then the CO is supposed to call validate volume capabilities and send the right capabilities.
I'm just trying to think through, like, if it had been published in file system mode, and then someone erroneously sent a resize request for a block.
Yeah.
Would the EBS driver, for example, be able to tell that that was a bad request, or would it just say, "Oh, it's block. I don't need to do anything. Return success"?
No, that's valid use case. That's valid, and I think the that's a good point. But that boils down to the same thing, like in the CO is supposed to validate the volume capabilities and before sending it, but
I mean, I've seen a lot of these funny issues with the CSI sanity tests where the test presumes that the SP is validating some of the fields, and it actually creates weird problems because some SPs just ignore the fields entirely, like the example I gave with my plugin ignoring the volume path when you do an expand volume. I had to add logic to my driver specifically to check for errors in that field, even though I ignore it just to pass the test, which felt odd to me. I don't know what the expectations are for SPs to be able to determine when they're being handed garbage, because if the SP doesn't need the field at all, it could just ignore the garbage, and that really shouldn't be an error. But the way CSI Sanity is written, it is. I don't know what to do about that.
I think that's fair point, but I think that's just not specific to this call itself, right?
Well, yeah, it's just, this is another example of here's a field that you know someone's going to write a CSI sanity test that puts garbage in this field and passes it down to your driver. And what's your driver supposed to do if you don't need this information at all to do
So,
your
for
job?
example, like how do you ensure that validate volume capabilities correctly validates like the volume type that is supposed to, like, you know, like, for example, if the control plane of the CSI driver does not store any state information, for example, and you send some garbage invalid volume capabilities, like the volume was created in block mode and you send file mode, then really speaking, a storage provider might not be able to actually validate it correctly.
There are gray area cases, but I mean, you can well, you can choose your driver. You can choose to implement your driver in a way where you have a volume that's like in a Schrodinger's box kind of a state, you know, where it's not a block or file system yet, because you haven't ever had to publish it to anybody. But you can also choose to implement it so you know from the beginning, oh, this was created as a block volume, so it's a block volume. This was created as a file system volume, so it's a file system volume, and you just store that
Create
some.
volume request time, you have to specify what you want. So I do not think that we have a way to say that, okay, you can skip it.
Why don't I, in the drivers I've written, I always know what it is, so I can always validate it, you know, and tell you that that's not valid. But
Yeah,
you're
so
correct that there are situations where you do have a volume that hasn't yet chosen to be a block volume or a file system volume, and it could in principle be both.
no, I'm not saying that. I'm saying that, like, because the control plane does not store whether the volume is, like, for example, looking at the EBS volume, you cannot tell if it is a block volume or file system. Only the CO knows that information, and the plugin itself does not stores that state anywhere. But plugin is stateless, like the CSI driver is stateless, so it doesn't know that the volume that it was given
Okay,
is.
yeah. So what you're saying is the plugin has chosen not to store that information. You can store it, but if you choose
I think
not to, then you have to depend on the CO not to lie to you.
yeah, but trying to say that this problem is kind of like how each individual storage provider implements it, and I think is orthogonal to like how the capability field work for controller expand volume. It's unrelated.
Well, if it's okay to depend on the CO not to lie to you, then yes, I think it's perfectly reasonable to have this field and say, oh, if it's block, I don't have any work to do, I'm done.
I
But
think it's reasonable to say that you have to expect the CO to pass the right thing here. I
then we
recognize that.
should look at a lot of the existing CSI sanity tests where they explicitly pass garbage to the SP to see that it returns an error, and
Yeah.
you can only pass those tests if you're storing the appropriate
Yeah.
information to
And
know
so
that
in
it's
those
lying to you.
tests, does it expect like, hey, I'm going to pass file, and then at a later point on a publish, I'm going to pass block, and it expects you to fail that?
Not that case, no, but there are some cases where it passes you garbage that you can only know that it was garbage if you had stored a little bit of state.
Right. So basically, it's making an expectation that you have stored state about
That,
volume capabilities.
CSI Sanity is making that expectation. The
Yeah.
CSI spec doesn't say you have to do that.
Okay. So that makes sense. So CSI Sanity makes assumptions that
Yes, but to answer the original thing question, like if the CO sent the wrong volume capability, the spec answers the CSI spec says that the CO should reject controller expand volume call. It's possible that the storage provider does not have a way to, if it does not stores the capability, does not have a way to validate it, but that's storage provider's problem. I think so. Correct me if I'm wrong. And yeah, so I think we should be fine for the most part.
Okay, so I think the takeaway here is we need to update CSI Sanity to not have this kind of expectation since it's not part of the spec. So if someone can open up a bug against CSI Sanity, that would be a great follow-up. Any other concerns with this PR?
You had there was one concern that you had said yesterday that I kind of addressed, like if you go all the way to the bottom. And David had a concern. Yeah, this one. Yeah. Should we say in the spec that the access type will not be said? So yeah, so access type and access mode is required field actually. Access type is one of type and access mode is required. So yeah.
The problem I have is if a CSI, if a Kubernetes PV has multiple access modes, or sorry, access types, what should we, what would Kubernetes pass in?
Yeah, I mean,
Technically, you can only use one at a time.
Right.
And I think the way Kubernetes is implemented, things blow up when you try to use two. Because I was writing a test just the other week where I was trying to have a PVC that had both read only many and read write once, and which is a valid thing to do. You can say, well, you can use it one way or the other way, but not at the same time because it's not read write many. And it let me create the PV, so the whole create volume succeeded. But then when I tried to attach it, the attacher said, wait a minute, I don't know what to do with two access modes, and it blew up.
so, but Saad's comment was more like, what if a volume has two capabilities? Like it's a list, right? So one is like one access type, not access mode. One is access type block, and one access type is file.
Well, that's never valid.
Yeah, that I don't think is actually possible.
So
on the Kubernetes side, you can only specify one or the other in a PV.
but in the CSI, it's possible actually. Like in the CSI spec, the way it is.
That's true. You're right.
But the way I have written is like I have assumed that you can never have two different access types. So whatever, like if there are multiple volume capabilities, they will all have same access type. That's the.
Well, but you can validate that in your volume create volume. When you're validating, you can say, wait, I see both, so I'm going to reject this request. And you know that Kubernetes would never hand you that, so it's not going to get you into trouble with Kubernetes at least.
Oh yeah, that's. So I think we should be okay here, I suppose.
So do we need to be more explicit here, or we can just kind of not say anything and do the right thing on the Kubernetes side?
I think that doing the right thing on the Kubernetes side is going to be tough.
Yeah, that's what I'm worried about.
But like the create volume, when it makes and you pass to different access types, then it should reject the create volume request, right? I mean, it's nothing to do with. So technically, you can never have like volume capability, which will like two volume capabilities, one lists block and one lists file. So So why is it a concern here then? You will always have same value in both, even if you have 10 capability field, they all will have types.
Why? The trouble is with multiple access modes.
But we don't care about access modes here, right?
Maybe not.
Yeah, we don't. We just need an access type will be set always. Maybe, yeah, that's what I tried to clarify. That access type will be set in all the capabilities. You take any of the volume capability that was passed, and access type will be set in.
Well, there is an issue with so the access mode could say read only, and sometimes you can't
No,
do an expand on a read only volume.
that's a different thing that will handle like when we do because we are passing read only as explicit field on node publish, node stage. So not node stage, I think node publish has it, and controller publish has it. So we'll handle that different. But that's not really related to access mode. I mean the way I see it. So we'll just, this is more like access type.
Well, I feel like it matters if we ever get it fixed so that you can support 2 or more access modes at the same, or not at the same time, but at different times, then which access mode is being used can matter. Because if you're using the read-only access mode, it's going to fail. If you're using the writable access mode, it's going to succeed. And you're right, we might get the read-only signal some other way, but we have that whole big issue about the many ways of doing read-only and why it's a giant mess.
Yeah, so but that's a different thing, and I think the volume capability, the way it is specified, this is consistent with how it is passed in controller publish or a node stage and stuff. So I think we should be fine. Like, and the read only handling is separate, and at least I want to keep it separate.
You're probably right. I don't want to disagree with that. I just wanted to point out that we don't yet do multiple access modes on the Kubernetes side. And when we do it, we might find out that it's uglier than we thought.
That's we decided to add a separate field. I mean, it's for read-only, right, handling, and at that time, we'll see.
Well, I don't know that it's that simple to say, oh, it's just a separate field, because you could have a read-only access mode and set read-only to false, and then that has to mean something.
Yeah, that's why I want to say, like, if we have this complexity, can we just say that access mode should be ignored here if it's specified? And then in the future, if we do want access mode to be used, we loosen that restriction?
That would be a tightening, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it might be.
It might be safer to say you're supposed to look at it and then later remove that requirement and say, okay, you don't have to look at it.
Yeah, the problem is if you say you have to look at it, you also have to define what does it mean and what should the color set. And in this case, I think we don't really care about what the access type is. The only thing we care about is the access mode.
No. In this case, we care about access type. We don't care about access mode.
Yeah, I think you got that backwards.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, the block versus file, not the.
Yeah, read, write.
Yeah.
Can we just pass in the access type, not the whole volume capability? Then that would just be.
That might be cleaner. Yeah, if that's all we want people to look at, just put that one field in.
Yeah, as long as we don't have some point in the future where we're going to want both, I think that's fine.
Well, no, well, in the future, if we wanted both, then we would go back and add volume capability as yet another field. And it would just look ugly. But at least it would be backwards compatible.
That's true. I think that might be the cleanest option. It is ugly, but it is at least very explicit.
The problem is we might have to define new type for it actually. We'll have to just say, I mean, I hate to use string for it because we already have a type for it. So, I mean,
I think what you're going to have to do is copy the existing type over. So yeah, you could like duplicate this. That would get pretty ugly.
Yeah, I mean, I could define an enum, new enum, something, but I mean, it's good to have one central place to define this actually, not like multiple ways of defining.
Yeah.
So, like, the main concern here is we might in future. I mean, I don't see in future we might need access mode also for volume expansion in the control plane.
I think the big concern is that if you have access mode here and you don't define how it is set and how it is used, then you're kind of leaving it open to interpretation, which can result in bad things happening.
Right.
So if we're going to have it, we should be very tight about how it is going to be set and how it's going to be used. If we're not going to do that, we should not have it there. But then I also see the argument of, well, it's kind of crappy to have to redefine this entire struct just to remove one field that we may potentially use in the future.
Well, why can't we just figure out right now how the CO should populate it and what the SP should do with it and put that in?
So we could, Hamant, what do you think about that?
Oh, I'm thinking that I have to, like currently like the read only handling like the if I read the definition of access modes, it says okay the how the volume is published can be published once as read write on a single node, and single node read only can published as read only on a single node.
The way the CSI, I mean, I've looked at this closely recently because I was trying to get this to work. The CSI spec seems to think that an individual volume can support multiple access modes at the time it's created, but once you actually decide to use it, you have to pick one of them, and then you can only use that one at a time. The way Kubernetes has implemented it is, if you pick more than one, everything breaks. So you can only ever have one. So in practice, you'll never have a problem where you don't know which access mode you're using because you can only have one at all. So if the spec says you must pass in the access mode and it has to be correct, Kubernetes can easily do that because it only allows you to have one, and it would just pass the one that it has. But if we ever change Kubernetes to actually support two and pick one at the time that you're doing the publish, then Kubernetes is going to have to store which one it picked somewhere, so that it can.
Can we say that access mode must be the published access mode?
The volume may not be published at the time the controller expand volume is called.
But don't you get a capability at stage time? Or I'm sorry, controller publish. It's controller publish where this matters. So
right,
whether it's
if it's controller publish that matters, then you should have even in the future, if we have multiple access modes, at controller publish time, one needs to be selected, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
So then we can just say that the you must set the access mode to the access mode at controller publish time, or something along those lines.
They may call this. I'm just trying to read the controller publish call. It says the CO may call this RPC for publish to multiple node if has this multi-node capability. The spec does not say which capability the controller publish volume request should pick. If I mean, I know currently we do not have, but if there is, like, it doesn't say.
Well, what do you mean? Controller publish passes exactly one capability to the SP,
Right.
and that's presumed to be in use until you controller unpublish it.
But which one? If there are multiples, which one does it pick?
So I think that is already an issue. It's a Kubernetes issue that we have an algorithm to select something. It's not defined in the spec, and we need to figure out how to do that mapping better. But I think for this PR, we can say whatever your controller publish volume request is, pass the same volume capability here.
Yeah, and if there's multiple calls to controller publish that are mutually incompatible, the spec currently says you're supposed to reject those.
Yeah.
So, and the only way to do that is to have some state stored somewhere, which is how, you know, what are the past controller publishes that have happened.
So we are trying to say that like the controller expand volume could be called even when controller publish volume is not called. So, but we are
That's not
trying to say
possible.
it's possible.
Wait. The node expand volume or controller expand volume?
Controller expand volume.
Oh, yes, okay. You can call
So
controller expand volume before controller publish volume.
yeah. So in that case, we are trying to say that, okay, set the access mode to whatever you will set now when you
Well,
call.
so that's easy. You could just treat it like as if controller expand volume implicitly does a controller publish and a controller unpublish, and includes all of the error checking that would have happened if you did those two things. So that if it's already published, it will check the new capability against the existing capability. And if it's not already published, it'll just check the capability against the empty set and validate it.
Yeah, we had to just carefully word it. I'm okay with adding that. We have to carefully word it because it's kind of. Does anyone have any idea about the?
So sorry, I wanted to clarify. So yeah, it makes sense if it's already published, you should have it be exactly the same as whatever it was published as. If it's not published, does that mean you don't do any validation?
Well, you do the same validation you would have done at publish time. So if it's a totally bogus capability, you can still reject it. But if it's one that you would have allowed in controller publish, you should allow it there.
Basically, we say that the capability passed here should be same as capability passed in controller publish volume. Whether
Right.
controller publish is already called or not called does not matter.
And it should be validated the same way.
Yeah, and it should be validated the same way.
Okay, I think that seems reasonable. Any objections from anyone on that? Okay, let's see if there were any other comments here that are open. Hemant, do you know?
There was a comment by David. I can't address it, and his comment was like, there are two ways of doing it. Why are we doing two ways? His comment is like, if the volume was a block type, then we are passing capability in the controller expand, and it will return probably false. Don't do node expansion. So why do we need volume capability in the node also? To answer that, those are separate. In many cases, like EBS or GC case, yes, if the volume was a block type, we might return false from the controller expand volume call. But like ISCSI or something, that does not apply. In that case, we still call node expand volume. And that's why we need capability in that case to node expand volume too, so that the storage provider can know what kind of volume it is dealing with.
And this is, I think, another case of the CO should share as much information as it has when it's doing these operations, as long as it doesn't cost the CO anything to do so. Because we don't necessarily know if anybody needs it or not, but if you don't supply it, you'll find out that somebody did need it.
Right. Okay, I think that seems reasonable. All right, so if we can get an update on these PRs as soon as possible, just ping me on Slack or over email, and I can help get these merged and approved. And then I think we're good for moving to 1.2.
Is there a drop dead date for 1.2 to happen?
As soon as possible. So we said 4 weeks ago, a month from now, which is today.
Okay.
We want to do it ideally this week. If we could do it by end of week, I think we'll still be in good. We'll still be good. It takes 3 business days to cut a CSI release. We have to declare that we're going to cut it, and then 3 days later we can actually cut it.
Okay.
And end of November is the code freeze for Kubernetes. So it's getting a little bit tight. So the sooner we can get it in, the better. I also wanted to ask if there were any other PRs that we would need. I know there were a number of changes that were proposed last time, and some of those were dropped. Do we want to go over those real quick to see if there's anything else that we needed, or do we have everything that we need? So existing capability PR, you already have. That looks like we're getting that in. Modify PR to add this disable read-only. So all this read-only stuff was dropped. Do we want to talk about why and if where that's going to be a problem?
Wait, the read-only stuff?
Uh-huh.
Why, I think we have a, don't we have a topic hopefully scheduled for the KubeCon face-to-face. We have to try to figure out, at least on the Kubernetes side, what the heck we're doing with read-only.
Yeah, so the main reason I dropped is because there's 2 things. One is that, okay, the volumes that are attached as read-only. Like I think only GCPD has a use case of that. I'm not aware any other volume type support attaching as read-only. So in that case, does it make even sense to, like expand volume? And there are cases where like volume is attached as read, right? But like published as read only. So in that case, the behavior will be something else. So right now the problem is we are not handling correctly all these cases. I mean, just for existing features in the CO, the CSI correctly. So I don't want to bring this in and like add one more complexity. It seems like we need to clarify how this interaction works and
The specific case that worries me is the case of you have a volume that is writable, but somebody wants to attach it to a pod in a read-only way on a particular node. Should you controller publish it as read-only, or should you just node publish it as read-only? It's not clear. If you do controller publish it as read-only, and then later someone creates another pod that's supposed to be able to write to that volume, and it lands up on the same node, then you're stuck because you've controller published it read-only. But now you need it to be writable, and you can't. There's no controller republish, and you can't controller unpublish it, so you're basically screwed.
Okay, so I think the takeaway is that there's a lot of complexity here. We want to think through all the possible cases before we rush to an implementation on the CSI side. By not having this, we acknowledge that there are cases that are broken here, but we're planning to fix them in the future. And for this release, we're not going to address those issues.
I'm sorry, what is the current behavior? If you try to expand, it's just not going to happen at all, or you just should not be doing it? The existing behavior.
If the volume is read-only, you're allowed to return failure from node expand.
Okay.
Because obviously it's read-only, there's not a lot you can do.
Mm-hmm,
And then
right.
it's up to the CO to eventually republish it writable somewhere and try it again.
Okay.
The current behavior though is that if your volume is like now this when we say read only, there's so many meaning read only. It is published as read only. There's like 4 fields read only. So depending on which field we're talking about, like let's like PVC. That PVC is node published is read only. In that case, currently we are not calling node expand volume at all on this. That's the
Okay.
current behavior.
So it looks like right now we should document what's the current behavior and then discuss what to do.
Yes.
Yeah,
Okay, so what that implies is that this follow-up that we had about how to do error case handling here doesn't apply because we never did that work. So I'll remove that. Then another PR to fix volume path. You guys got that in. And then send out a message to community mailing list as an FYI. I forget what message this was. Month, do you remember?
I think it was just like when you have a PR, send a message. So when I got lazy, you sent a message instead, but it did get a message.
Yeah, I certainly sent out a community message when I filed my PR about the staging path changes
Okay.
to try to call attention
That
to
must
it.
have been it. So it looks like after these two PRs merge, we should be good to go. So let's work on getting these PRs updated, merged today, and then I'll work on getting the 1.2 release started.
Cool.
All right, thank you, everyone. Any other questions, comments, concerns? All right, great. Well, thank you very much for your time. Take care.
You said interview? I know Victor has one, but he went over there already. Unless there are two.
Let me no, it's going to be I'm looking. What does the block do? Or the potential but oh. If needed. I almost say it's fascinating.
So the other thing is, the public subnet has the endpoints. It looks like the public subnet also has the endpoints. Okay.
30, 34. Same thing.
Oh no, I did straight from the.
If you close the one on there.
If you look at the first tab, the first thing is the should have. Actually, no. Yeah.
Why do you need to show something? No, so I think remove the people run out of the tables from because people it's the table based on the way one oh, I know who I don't feel for that matter, like taking introduction. So I did it.
They're touching
Oh, thank you. Yeah. Oh, this is really nice. Okay. Got it.
Yeah, also said that from a security assessment.
We do.
Yes. Okay, you have an EC2 key. I didn't see a specific form, it just says status code was forward. It just said service enzyme identity management status code forward. Yeah. That's the HTTP code for forbidden. Oh, you didn't check it for your line? Yeah, same thing.
Quick question. Really no ASM tattoos use that configuration. So inside here is or the API token. I am that display. Where can I see this token? I can go to see. I should be able to see the user.
Can I see
So over here, the one shows the directories.
So let me fix that one.
No, search for CBS. Search for CBS.
Is token store here? Is token store here?
Yeah, flash. Doesn't at least you'll be able to find.
I've never used.
Yeah, I haven't used these API tokens.
I think I'll be able to show you this thing.
But the flash play doesn't have it.
I'm surprised like these guys
Don't have that.
I just don't find the actually I have one of them internal question escalation.
There's a warning.
Oh, okay. What happened with you?
Yeah, that was that they have a escalation. Then they created a cluster using a registry. They know here is a token. And going into that flash play, they know the token is working. Release but then when they try to create
The service is
on the outside, we see this whole wonderful.
the error of the service is Amazon.
That token. Yeah, so
Create service
can get into
Are you sure it's connect to the right flash play? According to the law.
questions. Wants to know where can they verify things like I'm supposed to see these, and then they did they get to know from the code. They're trying to use these and then you can use
Is this the one that's trying to connect to the law?
If you're searching in the services, is there a search for extras?
check This is the job. So in our complete multi-test setup, sure, we have that two flash arrays and one flash plate. Okay. Inside this flash plate, I can get in there. Yeah. I can get into the box. Should I be? Where can I find this API token?
Settings, users.
On the flash array, I can find stuff.
If you can't find it here, I know how to get it in the CLI.
So you have to get
Security. What's under security?
Try you can see it just under users configuration.
users configuration.
No? Okay. So if not there, you can SSH into it.
Is it not working?
No, it's for a something that's a journal installation.
Oh, that one.
Yeah. So they have a flash plate.
Yeah.
Then over here they looks like they're using the token.
Yeah,
Flash plate tokens don't have necessary code. You just have the token. You can do. There's no read write limitation.
Not unless it's on the user. If The token's bound to
The
the
token's
user.
bound to a user, and the user could have a certain role. The user could be a read only.
But in this case, it's also trying to do a post.
The post fail.
But the post is going to create a new.
Is this internal or
Test.
can you log into the box?
I can't. Sometimes internal. It's also possible. Like this guy looks like this is trying to create a new.
It looks like that's the issue. I think they're getting more of Flashblade, API tokens working.
I mean, if they're getting authentication, have they posted their values right now?
Is this Vikash's explanation or is it a new one?
Oh no, it's a different one. It's assigned to me for some time.
Okay.
I think it is Pikachu.
So I guess
Can you go out?
was it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So this one is a one-off.
So I'm just wondering if they like formatted their file badly and like
That's also possible.
that feels like the obvious explanation.
We tried looking at that. It didn't seem to be that.
Didn't seem to be the format problem.
Yeah, it didn't seem to be like not right off the bat.
You can check
Or like a
with
bad
him
copy
if it's
paste or
still a
something.
problem.
Yeah, you can check with him if it's still a problem and if he can give you access. Yeah.
But while you guys are all here, so even for
Why?
our internal system, we inside this flash play, that's the flash play we're using right for testing. Yeah, and then I don't see where can I find this
In the CLI.
Yeah. Let me try.
Oh, Flashblade doesn't show you in the
Not usually, yeah.
So I can actually see.
IR and welcome.
All lowercase.
Yeah. So it's pure admin -- list. Oh wait, no, sorry. Pure admin list -- API - token
Yeah, I'm not sure.
-- expose.
Dash.
Install process has
Yeah.
conditionals that my process settings if it doesn't or what's going on.
That's
Admin list.
Oh, sorry. I'm not sure what you're looking for, so I don't know if it's a the account is set up differently than yours, and so the install script goes to a different path.
mildly concerning.
I can show you all sessions.
Oh wait, I think this is the other Flashblade, the one they left out to us, so I might not have it.
But we're still using it for testing.
You may not have pulled because we added a PR to revert it. But if you go to like the one we're using right now, it should be that command.
I can get these. So NFS endpoint. Go over. Which test files should I go? You're also reporting at the same.
Yeah, I'm guessing your repo is behind.
Yes. Workspace. Go PSA.
CDN. Yeah, there it is.
Yeah, I did a bunch of updates.
Oh, you have like 800.
I think I did that. Didn't think I was gonna do it.
Oh, good job.
Good job.
What's going on?
I have a stale configuration. So I was looking at the lunar. Let's see, always here the text.
Still not in there.
The UI doesn't expose it.
this is IR ad as well. So. Welcome. Admin.
List. A, B, C, I, N, okay, got it. Thank you.
Yes.
So why we don't show this token in UI?
Flash array is
Flash array does. I don't know why flashlight doesn't.
But this is a way to get to it. All right, okay.
I mean, I think there is an Ask IR UI channel, but
Yeah.
I tried to gain understanding. Okay, I actually still don't know what they were saying. They said it's fixed, and I said, well, what does that really mean? I still don't know that. Yeah, but if we have the first round and we keep it, we're good. I don't think I actually want an hour per array.
Why we don't stand up?
Stand up. That's true, but I'd imagine that if it was really bad, that yeah, maybe. The thing about that was time movie. They don't do things that minor things. Oh, that doesn't matter. Oh, it doesn't work. Okay, I whatever. I don't care. It doesn't work. Okay, I'll try. For me, don't explore it. And then you look at that's right. So many apps on step. Or maybe I'm doing it on purpose. Actually, yeah, that is yeah. You don't know. Oh, I remember too. Yeah, I broke my
For the screen review, we have our data release software. I saw you. Yeah. I was trying to help to update the release. So we are editing it right now.
So our draft plan is
Not tomorrow.
not tomorrow. Not tomorrow, yeah. Thursday.
Please, are you trying to update the wiki page? I just saved my changes.
Okay, let me update.
Oh, it's because you're.
Okay, that's the demo items. Last minute checking.
So I will
Demos for today. I guess I could talk about the findings I had wanted. It's like what impression flex. That's a demo, I guess.
Thanks.
how you open it's like, oh, you're gonna be doing on call.
Mr. Kerry,
Yeah, what's up?
can I have a gum?
Oh, please.
Thank you.
Why?
Oh, I actually came to talk to you about something, but the gum looks so pristine and new. Question about the processing time for SQS events, or sorry, so in the FA, the storage GB worker has a processing time for incoming events, or yeah. So I looked at the board there, and it says 10 seconds is the threshold that it can tolerate for the storage DB worker report. The data.
It should be much longer.
It should be. Maybe it's just SQS delay.
Dashboard, the search.
But my real question actually is, what is the okay amount of time to wait for processing?
Oh, I guess we just need to make sure we're talking about the same thing.
Okay.
I think, which
Oh, let's go down. Oh, we'll go up with this. Hey. Yeah, 10 seconds. Why it says like here?
Oh, processing time should be less than 10 seconds.
Is this measuring something else?
It's measuring how long, I guess majority that is true. Okay, and over here is reading average. On average, it's very good. I know there are some arrays of higher number of that really good.
Okay. So the SR function worker also has a processing time if you look at the on manifest processing time, which is actually not from there, but from our own, I guess, whatever is measuring the processing time on our side. So we're thinking of increasing this because right now it's set to 3 seconds.
The threshold.
Yes, not this one. Yeah. Oh, it's not this one. It's the alert. Alert is set to 3 seconds for L2. We're thinking of increasing it. What is a, so we were thinking 5 seconds, but I look at the story review and it's at 10 seconds. So now I'm wondering, should we increase it 10 seconds for L2?
It's really, so because you want to know what's the current value. You want to pick up when there's something going wrong. And you certainly don't want it you want to set it such a reasonable number.
Yes.
So you can catch errors.
But at the same time, if it recovers within 10 seconds, or like if it was a bit over 5 seconds but recovered, like I would say, so my question is, so it seems like it's okay, tolerance 10-second delay for processing time in the storage review. So is it okay to, like, as an upper bound to say we are okay with processing time being 10 seconds? Yes. What this one here?
Average processing time is greater than something. And but in my opinion, you've got to see what are the, if for the whole time everything is like this, of course you set a very reasonable threshold. But you have to check all the histories. Like at some point, for example.
Well, that's because of series.
On that day, this day.
Like that's fine.
Yeah, but still the downstream is going to have problems.
Yes. No, I'm saying this is because of a known issue. So that is.
Did you want that? Once we set the threshold to 20, 20 seconds,
yeah, let's say
it's still gonna die.
Yes, yeah. But in case of known issues, that's fine to fire because that is an actual issue.
And then over here, the normal processing time is about that.
Yes.
Most of the time here should be just 1 to 2 seconds.
Yes.
Yeah, 5 or 10. So would you want to get fired when it's at this time? This is also a normal condition.
This is normal for what was set up in series DB. So
I think there's so much faster now. Everything is last time.
It look, yeah. If you look at the search SR function worker, like I think, oh, no.
Yeah, I guess it's pretty clear, right?
So
use this as a baseline, setting 5 seconds. It's a very reasonable threshold.
Okay.
If that's a normal baseline, already 10 seconds.
Yeah, that's why I was wondering.
Yeah.
So from what you're saying, it feels like 5 seconds is more appropriate.
Yeah, if you use this as baseline.
Okay. Okay.
Sounds a normal condition, 1 to 2 seconds, even in some bad situation, 5 seconds. Then they continue to tune that activity.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Oh, wait. You can send me. Because I reintroduced all the stuff to them. I was looking for Jeez.